What is going on, everybody? This is Tyler Anderson with GetASax.com, your source for the best saxophones and best saxophone mouthpieces. Today, we have a microphone shootout to end all microphone shootouts concerning the saxophone. Now, I already know I'm going to get comments of people saying, hey, this microphone that I really love to use or this microphone that I've seen a lot of people use is not on this list. So how are you saying that this mic shootout is so great? And that is a really good point. So I wanted to start out this video by saying that the goal of this video is not to get our hands on every microphone that I've ever seen a saxophone player use, although we do have a lot of microphones in this video. The goal is to provide you with a complete array of microphones at different price points that represents kind of a comprehensive array of what you are going to encounter as a saxophone player when you go out there into the world, either performing live or in the studio or finding something to record at home. If you are wondering, I'm trying to figure out what microphone to use, where, or I'm trying to figure out what microphone to buy, I promise you that if you watch this video, you will be able to make those decisions from an educated perspective. Now, if there is a microphone that you really love to use and you stand by it, please post that in the comments. It can be a resource for all of us. I'm hoping that there is a lot of conversation in the comments about this video because everyone has different experiences and we all have a lot to learn. There is a free PDF linked in the description of this video that is a comprehensive guide on how to choose a microphone as a saxophone player. There's a helpful flowchart in there that can help you head into a positive direction for what you're trying to do. I also go into talking about polar patterns and frequency range charts and impedance and a lot of concepts that are important in understanding microphones. But I don't have time to discuss all of that in this video, which is why we made this packet. So make sure to grab that free PDF. There's a ton of information in there that I promise will be helpful. Now, before we start scrolling through all these microphones, I want to go ahead and share with you a little bit of the method to the madness and how I created this microphone comparison. To start out, I would play into each microphone and try to get a peak value of around -6 decibels in my DAW. So doing a little bit of gain staging to start out. From there, I would sit down at the mic and I would adjust my saxophone position to try to find the sweet spot between the microphone and the sound it was picking up. And once I got that, I would go ahead and play the excerpts I created for each microphone. Now, after that, on the back end, I would go ahead and adjust the gain of these clips again. The reason for that is even if two microphones are giving a similar decibel reading, there can be a perceived difference in loudness depending on the relationship between the high-end frequencies and the low-end frequencies in that microphone. So even if they are giving a similar decibel reading, they will not sound at the same volume. So I went ahead and adjusted all of these clips to make sure that they had a similar perceived volume level. Now, is there a subjective nature to this? Yes. But the issue is we all have a natural bias to assume that if something is louder, it is better. So in order to counteract our own natural bias, it is very common in microphone shootouts to go ahead and adjust all the clips so that they have a similar perceived volume. Lastly, a quick note about microphone placement. I did not try to get the same microphone placement for every microphone. All mics respond differently to distance and other placement factors, so I thought it was important for this to do the thing that we're going to do in the studio and the thing that we're going to do live, which is get the best saxophone sound out of that microphone than we can get. And I just realized that I forgot one more thing. So I added a little bit of reverb to all of the tracks in the initial review section. I think listening to the dry saxophone audio is like the worst thing ever. So I don't want to put you through that. But if you are looking for that information at the end of this video, I have placed all of the examples back to back with just the dry saxophone audio. I also included some full range scales at the end too, with just the dry audio. So if you're looking for that, check out the end of the video. We're kicking it off with the microphone that we see everywhere and are not excited to use. It is the girlfriend or boyfriend that you don't want to tell your friends about. It's the Shure SM57. The Shure SM57 is a dynamic microphone. If you want to know more about what a dynamic microphone is, make sure to download the free PDF. For the sake of this video, dynamic microphones are going to be less sensitive and capture a smaller frequency range than condenser microphones. This makes dynamic microphones great to use live. And so that combined with $100 is the reason why the Shure SM57 is the microphone that we see everywhere we go. These get a bad rap, and I really don't think they're that bad. They cost $100. They're indestructible and will last forever. And to tell you the truth, if I'm going to a gig in a rough part of town, I'm not going to bring my nice microphones. I'm bringing the Shure SM57. So let's hear how this mic sounds. So the SM57 is definitely not going to give you that full warm sound of the saxophone. It doesn't do a very good job of capturing the low end at all, so it can sound pretty thin. But if you're playing in a 10-piece band with drums and bass and keys and other horns and stuff, you really don't need to hear the full range of the saxophone to kind of get the feeling across. So even though this isn't the best saxophone sound ever that you're hearing out of this mic, in the right setting, it does its job. And that's the reason that, you know, there's still situations where I will use this mic. The next microphone we're checking out is the Sennheiser E935. This is another dynamic microphone, so it's great in a live setting. It was originally made to be used as a live vocal mic, but I think it works really well with the saxophone in certain settings. It comes in at $200, so it is a bit of an upgrade price from the SM57, but it does capture a lot more detail than the SM57. I feel like the high end on this microphone is a little smoother, but this microphone is very bright. So before we talk about all that, let's just hear how it sounds. So like I said, this microphone is definitely really bright. At the end of the video, you can see how it stacks up right against the SM57, and it's definitely a lot brighter. But there's situations where that can be helpful. I actually like to use this microphone in more of a duo setting where I'm just playing with a piano player or a guitar player in a situation where I'm not playing very loud. I think this microphone is really, really great in that setting because you get a lot of high-end sparkle that's really nice and sounds good in the room. This microphone can also be a really great option if you're playing in a large band and you have a really dark sound. Having a dark sound in a large band can kind of be a difficult problem to deal with, but this microphone would be a really great option for you. I think when you should definitely not use this microphone is if you are a very bright pop saxophone player and you are playing in a band. Don't use this. It would be too much brightness. It would just way too much. So the next microphone on our list is the Shure Beta 98HC. This is the first condenser microphone that we're taking a look at. Like I said, if you want to learn more about condensers, check out that free PDF. But for the sake of this video, condenser microphones are highly sensitive and they capture a larger frequency range. Because of this, they're typically used in more controlled environments like recording studios because they can pick up the sound of your air conditioning. They can pick up the sound of your keys if you stand too close to them. Because of this sensitivity, it's not very common that they're used in a live setting unless it's someone really experienced because you can start to run into a lot of feedback issues. But the Shure Beta 98HC is a different kind of condenser microphone. It's made for live performance. It's a clip-on mic, so it's really awesome if you like to move around on stage, and it gives you all the benefits of a condenser microphone, that better low and high-end response, without that high level of sensitivity. Its sensitivity rating is more similar to a dynamic microphone, so when you use it live, you don't run into feedback issues and you don't pick up absolutely everything around you. Let's check out how it sounds. This microphone is definitely on the bright end of the spectrum. It's not as bright as the Sennheiser E935, but it's definitely brighter than the SM57. Condenser microphones do tend to be brighter, so it's true to nature in that sense, but the brightness tends to be less harsh, which I would agree with on this mic. I don't think that the high frequency capture is super harsh in any way, so although it's bright, it's still a pretty smooth response. Now you can mess around with the gooseneck on the mic to, push the mic further into the bell to try to get more lower frequencies. The bell of the saxophone is really not the best place to grab sound when recording. Typically what I try to do is have the microphone about 6 to 12 inches away from me and pointing directly below my left hand. So my biggest beef with this microphone is just that you have to record, directly out of the bell. But, if you're performing live and you like to move around on stage, and I move around a lot when I play, so it really helps in that case. It sounds pretty good. So it's not a terrible mic, but for a condenser microphone, it doesn't capture the low end super well. next microphone is the AKG P420, and this is really a great entry-level microphone into studio condenser microphones. It has that high sensitivity that we talked about earlier, but it also has a lot of other great features. You can use different polar patterns. You can use a cardioid pattern, a figure 8 pattern, or an omni pattern. Get that PDF if you want to know what that means. It also has a low cut filter, so it'll naturally cut off some of the really low frequencies as you play into it, which can be helpful. And it has a minus 20 dB pad. If you're trying to record anything that's particularly loud, that can be helpful. This is a microphone that you definitely want to use in more of a controlled space. It's not meant for a live performance. You know, it's meant to be used in a studio or at home. You want to make sure you're in a room with carpet or a rug. You just don't want a lot of reverb in the room, or, you know, just the sound of the saxophone bouncing around off of, like, you know, concrete walls or whatever you might have going on at home. You want to try to make it as controlled of an environment as you can, because these microphones are really detailed and they pick up everything. Let's check out how this one sounds. So with this microphone, we're definitely starting to get that warm, full sound of the saxophone. And this is what condenser microphones are really great at. They pick up not only a larger chunk of the high frequency range and the low frequency range, but they do it in a really pleasing and detailed way. Now, I would say with the AKG P420, the high end compared to other condensers is a little bit harsh. When it comes to condenser microphones, as you pay more, you're essentially paying for that smoothness in the high end. So it's still a really pleasing high end sound, but when we get to some of these nicer condenser microphones like the Neumann TLM103, the high end in this microphone sounds harsh compared to some of the really nice condenser microphones. Our next microphone, the Electro-Voice RE20, is one of the best microphones for the saxophone, in my opinion. It's awesome. It captures the saxophone in a really, really pleasing way. It's a dynamic microphone, but it's a dynamic microphone that definitely belongs in the studio. So it's a great option for someone who's looking for a good mic to play live and in the studio. I would say that for a microphone to use live, it's pretty expensive. It comes in at $450, and it's also a very big microphone. So I would really only use this live if you're trying to get a studio quality recording out of that live session. The EV RE20 has less low end than a lot of other condenser microphones, but overall it just captures the saxophone in a really pleasing way. Let's check out how it sounds. So we're definitely getting that still that full rich sound of the saxophone. We may not be getting as much of the low end as we did with the previous condenser microphone. Particularly the way this microphone captures the high end of the saxophone is just really pleasing to how we naturally want to listen to the saxophone. One of the things that I really enjoy about this mic is the way that it captures the dynamics of the saxophone. So, whether you're playing loud or quiet, that dynamic range that naturally happens in the way we play. It just does it in a really pleasing way, and I think a way that just really sits well in recordings. Typically with condenser microphones, we've got to do a lot of work to compress that dynamic range of the saxophone because the spikes are really big. But with the EV RE20, you really don't have to do that. It's, it basically just sounds great without any post-production really being needed at all. It's an awesome microphone. So the next microphone on our list is the Voodoo VR1, which is a ribbon microphone. This is the only ribbon microphone on our list, but a great ribbon microphone for the saxophone. One of the reasons that ribbon microphones are so desirable is because of their warmth and even frequency capture. So the microphone itself is not going to color your sound or artificially boost the high end of your sound, leaving you with a very warm and velvety recording, which for the saxophone can be really awesome. One of the issues that we run into with ribbon microphones is that they require a lot of extra gain, and I mean a lot of extra gain. So you're going to need to use a preamp, or you're going to need to use a mic activator that can add clean gain to your signal. Otherwise, the microphone is just going to be really quiet and also just sound dull. The Voodoo VR1 is a passive ribbon microphone, which means that it does not require power. That's how traditionally most ribbon microphones are. If you ever get into vintage ribbon microphones, it's important to note that if you accidentally send phantom power to them, you can destroy the microphone. So they're really delicate and you need to be careful with them. But the newer ribbon microphones are, for the most part, not like this. You can accidentally send power to one and it's not going to hurt the microphone. And now there are active ribbon microphones. I believe the Voodoo VR2 is an active ribbon microphone that requires power, and I would imagine this is to deal with the gain issues that we run into with passive ribbon microphones. I haven't used an active ribbon microphone, so I don't know if we still get that desirable warmth from them, but those options are available. All right, let's check out how this microphone sounds. So we are definitely getting that warm and lush and velvety saxophone sound. It just makes you want to sit on the couch and lay back and rest and listen to some music. It's awesome. It also just sounds a lot like what we would hear traditionally from some of the iconic recordings that we've listened to in terms of how the saxophone sounds. I don't know if they were using ribbon microphones on those sessions, but it just, there's something about ribbon microphones that just feel a little more traditional, which can be really great. Now, one of the drawbacks is that we definitely don't get the high-end sparkle that you would get from a condenser microphone, and we don't get as much detail as you would get from a condenser microphone. Now, obviously, you know, if you mix the sound of this microphone, you can get more high end out of it, but it's just not the same, especially with the lack of detail. And a lot of times in recordings, you know, that high end sparkle and that detail can really establish you as the dominant voice in the recording. But we're really just kind of making creative decisions at this point, and the warmth that you get from these is well worth the lack of detail that you would get from a condenser mic. And it just depends on the overall vibe of how you want your saxophone to sound in a recording. So we have finally made it to the Neumann TLM103, which at $1,300 is the most expensive microphone on our list, but for good reason. If you decide to start investing in more expensive large diaphragm condensers, you're essentially paying for the fact that you can get all that detail that you get out of a condenser microphone without dealing with the harshness that often can show up in the higher frequencies. The TLM103 is the microphone that we use to record all of our horn sound samples on. And, you know, you may be asking yourself, Tyler, why are you not using a ribbon microphone? Why are you not using the RE20 to do those recordings if it's such a great microphone for the saxophone? And the reason is really because of what we're trying to accomplish with those sound samples. We want there to be as much detail as possible in those recordings so that's easier to tell the differences in how horns sound. If we recorded all of those sound samples on a ribbon microphone, it would be a lot harder to hear how horns sound differently. When we do record these sound samples, I do send this microphone through an outboard signal chain that adds a lot of warmth to recording. At some point, we might share what that is, but right now it's kind of our secret sauce. Anyways, let's go ahead and hear how this microphone sounds. That's definitely a really great and high production sounding recording of the saxophone. But that being said, you know, this might not be always what you need. Should you personally invest $1,300 in a microphone? Probably not. The reality is, if you're doing the kind of recording that requires a microphone like this, you're probably doing it in a professional studio where they already have all those microphones. So it's really not necessary to have one yourself. It's also important to note that even though this microphone creates great recordings of the saxophone, it might not necessarily be the recording that you want. You might prefer the warmth of a ribbon microphone or, you know, the natural response of something like the RE20 if you're trying to do really high-end recordings of the saxophone. And both of those microphones are way cheaper than this one. Some of these high-end condenser microphones get upwards, you know, almost up to $10,000 to buy one of these microphones. So can you buy a $10,000 microphone? Can you buy a $1,300 microphone and get a great recording? Yes, it's kind of what you're paying for. But there's also a lot of other options that are a fraction of the cost that can get you incredible recordings of the saxophone. Last microphone on our list is the IntraMic, and this microphone is really a specialized microphone that is in its own category. A guy in France makes these by hand, so if you order one, it can take months for it to actually show up at your door. And the guy who sells them in the States will get back to you, but it takes time. So if you're trying to get one of these, get ready to be patient. The microphone itself sits inside the neck of the saxophone and then has a cable system that runs down the horn to a preamp that's included with the system. And, if you show up with this somewhere, it definitely is a conversation starter. It definitely makes you feel kind of cool and futuristic. I don't know. But one of the reasons that this microphone was designed was really to make using guitar pedals with the saxophone a lot easier. So one of the issues that we run into when we start to experiment using guitar pedals with the saxophone is feedback. The sound of the effects in the room can get cycled back into the microphone, which can just create issues. And because the IntraMic is isolated in the saxophone, we really don't run into those issues, just bringing a lot of freedom to the experience of trying to experiment with that medium. That being said, I have seen people use these live. I've seen videos of high production recordings in studios where someone is using an IntraMic. So it's really an all-purpose microphone. Let's check out how it sounds. So it's definitely really cool to hear the quality of recording that we can get off of a microphone that's basically right at the beginning of the instrument. Every time you play a note, the entire tube that is the saxophone is resonating at that note. So even right at the beginning of the instrument, you can pick up a good recording. Now, as far as the overall sound of the microphone, it is very, very dark and very compact. And that makes a lot of sense for where the microphone is. We're not going to get any of the natural diffusion of the sound that happens as we record the saxophone in a room, even in a room that's extremely dead and acoustically treated. That being said, there are some huge advantages to having this kind of isolation built into the microphone. One of my least favorite things about hearing acoustic music in the 21st century is that the drummer is in his own room and the bass player is in his own room and the saxophone player is in his own room. And, that kind of isolation is really great for pop music. But when you do it to instrumental music, I think it just kind of kills the spirit of the thing. And I also think in improvised music and when you're playing with a group of musicians, if you can't have the physical experience of feeling what the drums sound like, feeling what the bass sounds like, it just sucks. So using this microphone, you could be in the room with the drummer and not get a ton of bleed in the microphone, at least not as much as you would get using other kinds of microphones. I did experiment a little bit with trying to mix the sound of this microphone, and I just kind of discovered that I'm not really experienced enough to know how to get a great studio sound out of this microphone, but I have seen lots of videos where people do. I just don't know how to do it. So if you're someone out there that gets it, hit me up. So that kind of wraps up the review section of this video, and I wanted to kind of give some closing comments about all of these microphones. After that, I'm including some off-the-cuff observations that I had as I was setting the gain of all of these recordings, and I go back and forth between microphones a lot in that section, which can be helpful. And then at the end, there's going to be all the dry saxophone recordings. I'm going to go ahead and add a lot of YouTube markers in that section so it's easy for you to hop between different microphones and examples. But basically, my closing observations for this review section is the microphone is a tool in creating art. There's really no correct microphone. There's really no best microphone, because at the end of the day, there might be a situation or a possibility, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, where the SM57 might be the best microphone for the job. I don't know what that situation is, but I believe it might exist. So it's really important to pay attention to the fact that when choosing microphones, the biggest factors are, what am I trying to accomplish and what can I afford? Budget is a big part of the journey of microphones, because like you've seen, some of these microphones are very, very, very expensive. I hope there is a lot of conversation in the comments about all of this information. Even as I listened back to these recordings, I was overwhelmed with the amount of things you could pay attention to and the ways that all this information can be interpreted. I'm sure you had situations where you were listening to me give feedback on a microphone and you were like, you're wrong. That's not what I'm hearing at all. So please post all of that in the comments so we can all learn as we each have our own observations around this information, and we can kind of help each other make more informed decisions. All right, now I'm just going to let the rest of this video roll. All right, so this is going to be a little more of an off-the-cuff discussion of these microphones. I need to go through and do the last step of the shootout, which is kind of get everything to a similar volume. One of the issues in comparing microphones is, depending on the balance between the low frequencies and the high frequencies, some stuff sounds louder. There's a perceived loudness to certain things, and our human ear often interprets louder as better. So I have to kind of go through and make sure that all of these sound at a similar level, not necessarily that they are the same volume. A good example of this is the Voodoo VR1 versus the IntraMic. A heads up, you can always know which microphone I am on. I'll always say it, but this yellow thing right here is telling you which one we're currently listening to. So if I switch over to this, where you can kind of see the decibel levels. So that's the Voodoo VR1. And you can see that I have the IntraMic set at a lower volume because this has a lot of low, kind of lower frequencies in it. If I set it to the same gain, I can do that real quick. Similar enough. Oops, click the wrong thing. You'll notice that the IntraMic just sounds louder, even though the actual loudness is relatively the same. So it's still even a little quieter than the Voodoo VR1, but because of the kind of balance of how it sounds, it has a lot more low end in it. It tends to sound just louder. So I have to go through all of these and make sure the perceived volume is the same, so we can kind of hear, get a good idea for the overall feel of the microphone. What's the character of the sound is kind of what we're trying to discover right now, not necessarily which one takes volume the best or things like that. We want to get an idea of the character of each one of these microphones. So this is going to be a little off the cuff as I do this, but I'm going to try to group microphones in ones that I think might be considered against each other. So the first kind of group in that setting is the Shure SM57 and the Sennheiser I'm forgetting the 935. So let's listen to this kind of bebop excerpt on each one of these mics. That might happen from time to time. I need to make sure I only have one mic selected. All right, now the Sennheiser. So that sounds, as a perceived volume, just a little bit quieter, so I'm going to add a little bit of gain to that. Okay, so I'm starting out with these two microphones because they are going to be considered against each other. The Shure SM57, the one that we all know about, the one that is at every gig that we ever go to, and the Sennheiser E935, which is technically a vocal microphone and meant to be used with vocals, but I think it works well as an upgrade to the SM57. But as you can tell, as you listen to these, the Sennheiser is very, very bright. And that's kind of the biggest drawback to this microphone. It's also more expensive than the Shure, but they're both under $200. That brightness can be really useful if you're playing in a large band and you're going to kind of need that edge to be able to, for people to be able to hear you and you to be able to hear yourself over the top of drums and bass. And, you know, especially if there's like roads or anything, you know, like it can be hard to compete as a saxophone player with all of that. So that brightness can really help. You know, one of the things that I say about the SM57, because it really gets a good, like a bad rap. People, you know, I mean, it's the cheapest microphone out there. It's the one that we all use, and we tend to be like, ugh. It's really not that bad. Now, you know, if I compare that to like the TLM, which is like a $1,300 microphone, I mean, you can definitely tell there's a big difference there. So big difference, you know what I mean? The SM57 tends to sound a little tinny. The high end frequencies, like the way it captures the high end, is kind of weird. I believe, and I'll put up a frequency chart for this. I believe this is the one that has kind of weird jumps in the high end. So it doesn't have really a smooth capture of the high end, which is pretty typical for a cheaper microphone. You know, you're going to be paying for that smooth high end and that good low end capture when you spend more on microphones. So with the cheaper ones, you're typically not going to be getting that. But you know, I think the SM57 is a good mic. The E935 has, I think, a lot more detail in it. I think the high end is a little more smooth, but it is a lot more bright. So a little more smoothness with the E935, but it is a lot brighter. So just something to consider about that. And the last microphone that I would really put this against is another microphone that we would use live, which is the Shure 98 HC. This is the clip-on microphone. So let's compare that to these other two microphones. Against the Sennheiser. And then against the SM57. Yeah. So yeah, with the Shure 98HC, we definitely start to pick up on the advantages of a cardioid microphone. In that we're getting better low end capture, and also this microphone is still bright. If I can compare this to the ribbon mic, the Voodoo VR1, that's not bright at all. You can really hear it. So definitely still a very bright microphone, but compared to the Sennheiser E935 and the Shure SM57, you're getting better low end. This starts to sound more like an actual saxophone, and the brightness is not as harsh as it is on the E935 or even the SM57. On cheaper microphones, the brightness that does show up tends to be kind of harsh and tinny, and not as fun to listen to. So the Shure 98HC microphone in the $200 range, this one's great because it's a clip-on, and you can move around on the stage. And also because of the goosenecks on there, you can still move around. So I'll play a little bit of when I was just kind of adjusting the location of the mic. So I kind of stuck it where I thought made sense, but there's obviously like a lot to play around with, even where you have that gooseneck, how far away from the bell it is or how close to the bell it is. That can really influence the kind of sound that you're getting. Typically with brighter microphones, the closer you get to the microphone, the more you get the lower frequencies starting to show up, something called the proximity effect. And so that can be something to play with. I mean, outside of microphones, microphone placement is a whole nother discussion that's really important and largely depends on what you're trying to capture and where it's going to end up. So yeah, in terms of these kind of under $300 microphones that can be used live, the Shure SM57 does a good job, kind of tinny in the high end. The Sennheiser E935 has a little smoother of a high end, but it is very bright. So that can also sound kind of harsh. And the Shure 98HC, I think, just starts to sound a little more like a saxophone. It does require phantom power, so if you're using it live, you need to be able to get power to the mic, which if you're at, a recording at a venue, the sound engineer will be able to help you with that. And if you're not, you just need to make sure that the mixing board that you're plugging into or whatever you're plugging into can provide phantom power. Okay, let's take a look at some of these other microphones. The IntraMic, which is this last one down here, can also be used live. Is a good option live. It's kind of intended to be used live. Oop. So, if I compare that to this microphone, the IntraMic is a pretty dark sound. There's adjustments in the preamp that comes with it. It allows you to change kind of the bright versus dark character of the sound. I think I have it as bright as you can go, so it's still pretty dark. But I'm going to talk about that mic in the context of these other kind of microphones that you would see more in a home studio recording or professional recording studio. If you're using condenser microphones, you typically want to reserve that for a controlled environment. You can obviously use condenser microphones live. The Shure 98HC is a live microphone, but because it's so close to the bell and kind of it's made to be like that, you don't deal with a lot of the bleed and sensitivity issues that you deal with condensers often. Like if I have a good condenser mic set up in my room, like this one, it's going to pick up the sound of everything around me. It's going to pick up the sound of the room. It's going to pick up the sound of the air conditioning. There's very sensitive microphones, so it can make them difficult to use live because they just pick up everything. So let's start with the AKG P420, which is kind of like an entry level condenser microphone, and we'll kind of go from there. Now, I want to compare this really quick to some of these earlier microphones. So you can see with these condensers in general that there's going to be much better low-end capture and much smoother and detailed high-end capture. The more money you pay for these microphones, typically, you're getting better low-end response and better high-end response. If I compare this AKG P420 against the Neumann TLM, which is like an uber great microphone. You can just tell the low end and the high end in the Neumann is just a lot more pleasing. But with condenser microphones, you really got to pay for that. The Neumann TLM is $1,300, so most people are not going to go that route, and it's not totally necessary. We're making art with these things, so at the end of the day, you can create all sorts of interesting combinations with all of this stuff. So the AKG P420. Starting to sound more and more like a saxophone. Now let's go against the RE20. So the RE20 is a little bit brighter. It's interesting as I compare these back to back. I've had all sorts of assumptions about these microphones, but when you compare them directly against each other, you really do learn a lot. Yeah, so just especially in maybe how I had these microphones placed, the AKG is sounding a little more dark. But let's compare those to the Voodoo VR1, which is a ribbon microphone. It's going to be very dark. Kind of noticing, I feel like I did a good job of setting gain on these because I'm not noticing anything that really bothers me. So anyways, the Voodoo VR1, ribbon microphone, people like these because they're very warm. They don't have a ton of brightness at all. They do require a preamp because they require a lot of gain to really get the kind of sound that you want out of them. So if you're going into an interface, you really want to go into a preamp, tube amp, something. There's mic activators that can add clean gain to the microphone on the way because you're just not going to have enough gain on the interface itself. Let me kind of think what makes sense to do here. Okay, so let's go back to the AKG. And the RE20 and the 98HC. I think all of these microphones can be used in kind of a recording setting. These three, the TLM, the Voodoo VR1, and the IntraMic are the most expensive microphones on the list. Well, the RE20 is pretty expensive too, so we'll kind of group that one in together. But I said this was off the cuff, so I wasn't lying. Okay, so the AKG, a little darker, but not as dark as the Voodoo VR1. Now, if we compare these to the Neumann TLM, this microphone is going to be on the brighter side, but it captures the brightness in a way that's really smooth. It's used a lot for vocals because of that. The higher frequencies, the more detail that we can hear in that frequency range, the more easily we are able to like understand what someone's saying, and it feels more pleasing to listen to. And the same applies for saxophone. Yeah, so with the TLM, you get what you pay for. You get the brightness of a good condenser microphone without it sounding really harsh. If I compare this against yeah, so the high end of that is a little harsher. Now let's talk a little bit about ribbon microphones real quick, because they are really dark. If you're using them in a recording situation, there's lots of ways that the darkness of something can be dealt with in a helpful way. So if I add a mixing app to this, I can raise up the high end. And get something closer to that Neumann. And this is what, if you're recording in a studio, someone's going to be messing, adjusting, making these adjustments to the sound. So, a lot of times with nicer microphones, what is nice is you're getting a lot of clean information that doesn't sound overly harsh, so that if I do want to boost the high end of the saxophone sound, I can do so without it being a total disaster. If I boost the high end of the SM57, let's see what this sounds like. All right. You really start to hear how bad the recording of the quality is when you start trying to mix these things. And so, one of the nice things about condenser microphones is getting a lot of detail. Same with a ribbon microphone. So that, like when you mix it, you can make adjustments without the sound just sounding weird. Let's compare the RE20 to the Neumann TLM103 real quick. So Neumann TLM, excellent condenser microphones. EV RE20, one of the nicest dynamic microphones that you can get, and sounds really great on the saxophone. So let's kind of hear the differences between those two mics. Here's the Neumann. I'm going to mess that up. Okay, now the RE20. So you can tell with the RE20 that it is brighter, but brighter in a way that's really nice. And some of that could be the microphone placement. It seems to be when I get into a particular range of the saxophone, it sounds a little brighter. What I like the most about the RE20 is its response to dynamics. Because it's a dynamic microphone and not a condenser, it's less sensitive. So the jumps in dynamics as you play are going to be less significant, which is really nice for mixing. It's almost kind of like this natural compression that happens. But yeah, let's listen to these back and forth again. So we'll start with the RE20 this time. So yeah, the brightness on that sounds kind of bright in a way that I think is pleasing for the saxophone, which is I think maybe why saxophone players like to use this microphone. live or in the studio, because it just makes the saxophone sound good. All right, TLM. You know, and with the TLM, you know, you just get that, you get good smoothness across the whole range of the saxophone, which is really nice. The last microphone that we have on the list is the IntraMic. It's hard to kind of put this into a category because it's pretty specific and it was made to be used with effects pedals. The microphone is inside the saxophone, but I have seen videos where people are using this kind of in a studio setting. So let's take a look at how it sounds. All right, let's compare that to the Voodoo, which is dark. So you get an idea of how dark the IntraMic is. The nice thing about it is when you're using it with guitar effects pedals, it is really, you don't deal with any feedback issues because the microphone is inside of the horn. But like I said, you know, if you were using this in the studio, once you go in there and so yeah, what I ended up doing wasn't helpful at all. But yeah, so this is kind of an off-the-cuff discussion, a little comparison of some of these microphones. At the end of this video, you know, all of these files are going to be played back-to-back so you can hear those differences. It's also important to note that right now I'm going into OBS, so the recording on this might be slightly different than the actual audio file. That will be at the end of the video. Cool. Hope this was helpful.